Okay, welcome back to our mapping of PMBOK 6. As you zoom out, you see the whole of the PMBOK 6 on one page. What we're trying to represent is all the processes and all the outputs. And today we're going to look at the tools and techniques just in planning, and then we look at executing and controlling. So we'll do initiating and planning in this module, and then we look at executing, controlling, and closing in a separate module. What you can see from the map, it needs a little bit of a key if you want, or an explanation, is that the outputs where they are repetitive is change requests and work performance information, and we've shown them here. Now, likewise, when it comes to tools and techniques, we see expert judgment. It's kind of a thumbs up, it's the good judgment. Expert judgment, expert judgment, expert judgment, basically, you'll see it 35 times. So there was no point in printing out 35 cards. Likewise with meetings, I had the infinity symbol, meetings going on and on and on. So you had meetings here, meetings here, meetings here, meetings here, but meetings not here. So you understand that sometimes there was meetings and sometimes not meetings. They got the idea. Now, project management information systems is one that's called up quite a lot. Interpersonal and team skills, again, also called up quite a lot. Now, we had an interesting one in PMBOK 6, which was data gathering, data analysis, and data representation. So 3 different ideas if you want. So who's good at data gathering, who's good at data analyzing, and who's good at data representation, a bit like we're trying to do here to represent something that's quite complicated. So for me, data representation is one of the most important areas, but obviously if you haven't done the analysis and if you haven't done the gathering, well, then it doesn't work. So putting those 3 together, but at times you might just see data analysis, and at times you just see my data representation. You might see different ones, okay? Now we do have one on its own, just be careful of that. It's decision-making, DM. So decision-making, and that's getting into how do you make decisions? Is it unanimous? Is it majority? Is it plurality? Or is it kind of dictatorship? So let's get going. We want to look at the types of tools and techniques that you would use in Develop the Project Charter. Now you can see here that we have data gathering, and then we have interpersonal and team skills. We have expert judgment, and we have meetings. So not a lot for me to add here. If you have a copy of the poster, well, then you can do this yourself. Likewise with identify stakeholders, again, there's nothing new to add, but here we have data gathering, data analysis, and data representation. But obviously we have the expert judgment and the infinity meetings going on. Again, you can see here, nothing really to add to these ones, other than what's there, the data analysis, data analysis, data analysis, data analysis, and meetings and expert judgment. In this case, decision-making coming up in the project management plan is an extra one here. So now we get into the first one where we start to see the differences between the tools and techniques here and perhaps in other areas. So collect the requirements has kind of the expert judgment, the data gathering, data analysis, data representation. We have this interpersonal and team skills, and we have decision-making. But we also have this idea of prototyping. So it makes sense that we would use prototyping here, not anywhere else. It's too late to use prototyping over here, and so we use prototypes here. The advantage of using a prototype is that it helps people to see what it is that they don't want as much as what they do want, and therefore prototypes are a great way of collecting requirements. Now, context diagrams will show us the overall picture, and whether there are influences or dependencies that we need to consider that are outside of our viewpoint at the moment. So a context diagram would be a useful tool and technique that we'll use there. To find the scope here has the usual kind of ones here, decision-making and data analysis, but it also has this one called product analysis. Okay, so now we're going to look at product analysis to see if there's perhaps even a financial product analysis you might do to say what's in and what's out, what we're going to do. And so that will help us here. So now create the work breakdown structure. We're going to produce the scope baseline, but the main tool and technique that we're going to use here, and it's quite a simple one, it's called decomposition. Decomposition is just when we take something and break it down into smaller components. And that is in essence what the work breakdown structure is. Okay, now we can see that there's quite a few coming up in this area here, so I'll go through them relatively quickly. Remember, we can pause, we can go back and go over them. So decomposition again. So to get to activities, we go below the work packages, and therefore we use decomposition again. That's obviously one of them here. Now, another thing we might use is called rolling wave planning. Rolling wave planning is where we set some milestones out and we decide that we're going to plan in more detail to the next one, let's say phase 1, but not into the later phases. So we might do more planning for the design phase, but not for the development or not for the deployment because that's too far in the future. So rolling wave planning, a very useful one there. Then we have 3 ones to do with this one now, which is sequence the activities. So in order to sequence the activities, we could use the precedence diagramming method. Okay, that makes sense that we would use this before that. It's just a method that's been around for a long time. Dependency determination and integration to make sure that we have a network diagram that attaches everything. Everything is connected in the network diagram. And then maybe leads and lags, just recognizing that they can help us to do a better representation of the networking, of the connections between the different activities that we've defined here, which come from the work packages here. Let's estimate the activity durations. And here we're going to see these marvelous 4 types of estimating in the PMBOK, which I think is very helpful to give us, obviously you could have come to this by yourself, but just say that there is a type of estimating that's called analogous estimating. So therefore it's similar to something. And then we have a parametric, which is based on some parameter, some algorithm, some mathematical projection. So we do that one, parametric estimate. We do have the bottom-up estimating, which is going to the bottom of the work breakdown structure, going down and adding up. Okay, so that would be the bottom-up estimating. And then we have 3-point estimating, whether it's PERT, the beta curve, or whether it's triangular with a triangle. That is a 3-point estimating. We're looking at 3 points, the optimistic, the pessimistic, and the most likely, and we're doing some calculations. So there you go. They're the estimating types that we might use, and so therefore they would be techniques. Now you can see that Develop the Schedule has quite a lot to help us to get this done. And so let's have a look at these. So some of the things you might want to consider. One is the critical path method. Of course, the critical path method is helpful because it identifies the activities that are on the longest path. It identifies the ones that have float, and maybe we can do something about that. It's a useful technique. The schedule network analysis. Okay, that's helpful just to do an analysis of the network that we produced over here. Now we may see leads and lags, of course, that we mentioned earlier. This is again just looking at the leads and lags to see if we need to change anything. Now we do have resource optimization, which is an interesting one. Assuming that we have some sense of the resources that we're going to have here. Now we may not have their actual names, or we might want to do some resource optimization to see that some body is not overloaded or some machine is not overloaded too much. Now we have schedule compression. The 2 primary ways we do this are fast tracking and crashing, as you know. And so there are ways that we compress the schedule by adding cost in the case of crashing or adding risk in the case of fast tracking. And then we've one other one, which is the first time we see the word agile in the PMBOK, which is agile release planning. And that's getting to the idea of sprints, not phases. So we might say that, yes, I see the schedule, but this is how we're going to release the product in these sprints. And so therefore we see agile release planning there for the first case. Now you can see that cost estimating will be relatively straightforward to us because we've seen it before. We're going to have analogous estimating, which is not very accurate, but it's similar to something. The next one is going to be parametric estimating, okay, because it has some metric or numbers. Then we have bottom-up estimating, which we said was from the bottom of the work packages, in this case from the work breakdown structure. You can see that. And then 3-point estimating, which was the optimistic, the pessimistic, and the most likely in some formula. So a weighted average, if you want. And now we can see that determine the budget is something that we can do, and we have some things to help us. Okay, so let's have a look and see what's here. Cost aggregation. So cost aggregation is how we take all of the costs and we group them together over a timeline, and we produce an S-curve or something to represent it. Financing will also help us. What financing is available to us? What financing do we need? And of course, that's particularly on large construction projects, perhaps. Most organizations will finance it themselves. Historical information review is very helpful if you're determining the budget to see if there's anything we're missing. If we're missing something, perhaps would be useful. And the fund limit reconciliation is a check or checking technique to check back to see what funding is allocated, what funding is available as against what budget we have calculated. So calculated against allocated needs to be checked. Okay, and that's basically what that will do. Now in plan risk management, we don't have anything other than the expert judgment, the meetings, and then we have this one, data analysis. So we've seen a lot of data analysis. Now here in identify risks, we do have one that's kind of interesting, and it's called a prompt list. And a prompt list is basically just a checklist. Okay, that's all it is. It's a fancy name for a checklist, but it's sometimes like a steeple or pestle or something. It has a mnemonic that's easy to remember. And so we might use one of those. Now we have two here in the analysis that are extra outside of the norms, if you want, outside of the expert judgment and the meetings and those kind of things. But you see the risk categorization is the one that we're going to put into qualitative risk analysis, and representations of uncertainty, which goes into the quantitative risk analysis. And so one of the benefits of doing quantitative risk analysis is that you're getting real numbers. You're doing representations of uncertainty and impact, and you're calculating the multiplication of the impact multiplied by the probability, and you're calculating quantitatively. And I'm not sure why you need the expert judgment there, but I suppose we're saying yes, it is one of the reasons. We have expert judgment here as well, remember, which is quite powerful in this case because we don't have real numbers. So personally, I would like to see this one being the numbers, or this one not the numbers. So I like expert judgment here. I'm not so fond of the idea that an expert overriding the quantitative analysis, which was the point of using the Monte Carlo analysis in the first case, that no expert could possibly see it. I suppose it's just helpful to consider it. So we now look at plan risk responses, and then we have the strategies for threats. So that's the primary one. What are our strategies for threats? As you know, it's avoid, mitigate, and transfer. And then what are our strategies for opportunities? Okay, so that's going to be the opposite of that. It's going to be exploit, enhance, and share. And then we've strategies for overall project risk. Okay, strategies for overall project risk. And then we'll have contingent response strategies. So contingent response strategies are there. And so now you can see risk, quite a lot going on. Let's continue on, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll go into execution and controlling. So, but you can see here, there is a lot of tools and techniques for you to learn. You don't have to memorize this. You just have to play with it like a jigsaw. And over time, you get a bit better. Where would I use prompt lists? Where would I use prototypes? Where would I use these things? And that would help you to get better for the exam. Okay, let's have a look. Plan quality management. We have this one. It's called test and inspection planning. It kind of makes sense that we would do some test and inspection planning to say what testing, what inspections are we able to do? Which ones do we want to do? Now, the resourcing, we have plan resource management and estimate. And so we do see this one called organizational theory, which is incredible because that's thousands of books. You can imagine there's PhDs and MBAs and everything based on organizational theory, and certainly a whole canon of knowledge there. So that goes in here, plan resource management. Primarily, we're going to look at functional, matrix, and projectized. We're going to look at different hybrid versions of that as well, perhaps. And then I want you to see this idea of estimating being similar to estimating durations and similar to estimating costs, but with one difference. Here we see the analogous, yes. Here we see the parametric, yes. Here we see the bottom up, yes. But what we don't see is the 3-point estimating, okay? So we don't see that here. And I presume the logic is that if you're looking for a conference room or a helicopter or a crane, you don't want optimistic or pessimistic because it's a crane. You need a 200-ton crane. And so that's not what we're actually estimating in this case. So perhaps that's why they took it out. Now let's look at planned communications management and then planned procurement management, and then we're done. So planned communications model management gets into this interesting idea that there has to be some kind of communications requirements analysis. Now, again, that possibly could have been back here at collective requirements, but you understand there should be some communications requirements analysis to see, is this going to work? Is it possible? Do we have the bandwidth? Do they have the technology? Now we have the communications models, which is interesting. What models are we going to use? What methods are we going to use? And so there's a slight difference between those that you'll study. And then WEC technology. Does anybody still use a fax machine, for example? How are the technology, whether Zoom is something we've all become familiar with as a technology, and perhaps there'll be better ones coming up soon. Okay, so now we're seeing that there are processes, there are outputs, there are tools and techniques. And you're starting to learn that you could build this almost like a jigsaw. And as you get better at doing it, you'd be able to represent, if you want, the PMBOK on one page. And then you could pick up any one of these and say, tell me about prototypes, tell me about bottom-up estimating, tell me about leads and lags, or tell me about the critical path method. And you would then go and get more information on that. But you wouldn't be lost when it comes to the overall view. So when you come back in the next video, we're going to look at execution and controlling and closing. And then we will have the complete picture of all of the processes, the outputs, and the tools and techniques.